You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Chapter 16. Hospitality. They took the main stairway, which overlooked the grand floral sitting room next to the magnificent window, with a marvelous view of the valley on this spectacular moonlit night. Edward and Jane went in one direction when they reached the landing, and Helen gestured for Mark to lead the way into the visitor's bedroom. Mark was in no position to judge events. He was utterly besotted by Helen and went like a lamb to slaughter. She proved to be as incredible out of her Levi's as she was in them. They took a shower together, reveling in their lustful nudity, that refreshingly new sensation when a couple are flesh to flesh for the first time. As they made love, Mark fantasized. It was as though Helen was part of the whole jungle of steaming exotic plants, like a latter-day Eve, a sexual temptress whose perfume and personal ambiance pervaded his body and soul, drawn to her like a fly to the Venus trap. He thought he could happily die like this. If the bomb was going to drop, then now was the moment. Entwined like the creepers, he was drawn inexorably into Helen's body. It was possibly the greatest experience of his life, and as his lust for Helen slowly subsided, the guilt for Jane insidiously crept into his mind. How was she? Was she feeling and thinking the same? And if she was it right and correct for both of them to experience a new and different sensation? The only danger was if either of them were to fall in love. Just the enjoyment which should not be denied to anyone. The very moment dawn broke, Jane looked at the man beside her on the bed. He was still naked, as when they had made love, as was she. It seemed like a dream to her, a part of the strange dreams from Mark's machine, yet, as the moments passed, she relived the hours she had spent with this man. It was certainly no dream. Jane slipped out of bed into the bathroom along the passageway, stopping for a moment outside the visitor's bedroom. She didn't know why. The repeated rattle of the internal mailbox made Mark sit bolt upright with Helen half hanging around his neck. "What is it? What's the matter?" said a startled Helen, suddenly realizing it was Mark beside her. She smiled. Some noise woke me. He broke off. "Oh, it must have been the mail. We're used to it and don't seem to notice," she said. "What time is it?" Mark desperately tried to focus on his wristwatch and finally came to the not entirely confident conclusion that it was just after 8:30. Helen stepped from the bed. "I'll get the coffee on," she said. "Or perhaps you prefer tea in England?" "Ah, but we're not in England," Mark replied. "Coffee would be perfect," he called after her as she made her way down to the kitchen. Jane appeared in the doorway. Mark was lost for words, as if some external force was preventing him from speaking. After a few seconds, which seemed like minutes to both of them, Jane rushed over to Mark as he sat on the edge of the bed. "Are you okay, Mark?" she said, looking him straight in the eyes. "Yep, fine. You? Are you all right, my love?" He tenderly placed his palm onto her face and ruffled hair behind her ear. "I am, if you are. You didn't mind, did you?" she said with an edge to her voice, a sort of pleading intensity, desperately hoping that things hadn't changed between them in those few short hours. "No, of course I didn't mind. If I had, I would have stopped it." "Yes, I suppose you would. But, Mark, I couldn't help myself. It seemed the natural course of events to swap with them. Did you feel it, too? Like I know it sounds crazy, like a sort of biological magnet intensified by the perfume of the house, the plants. It's difficult to describe." A tear perched in the corner of her eye as her voice faltered. Mark gently wiped her eye as they heard movement near the room. To their amazement, Edward and Helen marched into the bedroom arm in arm with a large rack of buttered toast in his free hand and a tray of coffees in hers. It seemed such a reassuring gesture from their wonderful hosts. It was meant to be. "Well," spoke Edward, "we've enjoyed a wonderful evening and night. Now for an equally wonderful day." Edward beamed at the slightly uneasy couple sitting on the bed and then turned to embrace his beautiful Helen. Jane, overcome with embarrassed emotion, fell into Mark's arms, half crying and half laughing. Edward and Helen were quite obviously happy, and so were their guests. It was one of those odd occasions in life when an unexpected turn of events could turn out good or bad, and also one which no one could do anything about. No one wanted to change what was going to happen, or did, and in retrospect they were all glad of it. Both Edward and Helen were a special type of person, extending their hospitality to the full. A hearty breakfast was had by all, toast, crumbs in the bed, and laughter in the air. A great slab of glistening aluminum quietly slid up and over, revealing a very smart beige soft-top Mercedes. Edward had insisted that they were to see his clinic before they left for New York City later in the day. Mark was very keen to see the hospital anyway, and was pleased at the invitation to do so. The car swung out of the driveway and past the trees and shrubs bordering the road, which gradually ascended a slight rise with sweeping lawns on either side. Mark spotted what he thought was the edge of a golf course just over a rise to his left. His suspicion was confirmed. "It's only been finished a month," Edward explained. "A spate of bad weather halted work on it last year. We must find time for a game together next time you're over here. That's a date, then?" "That's a date," confirmed Mark. They came to a halt at the main entrance to the architecturally superb building. The whole of one side was in fact also the roof, tiled with scores of solar panels and glass. At the top of the gently slanted glass wall, the remaining 7 or 8 yards were at an obtuse angle, and made a vast window roof in the same architectural style as the living room ceiling back of the house. Jane whispered to Mark, "I bet it's full of plants just the same." Mark smiled and nodded. "Yes, and they're just as beautiful," commented Edward. Having acute hearing, he had just caught the gist of the whisper, much to their embarrassment. Leaving the car under a magnificent palm, they made their way up to the same Art Deco-styled steps as the house, curved, shallow, and wide, so comfortable to walk upon. Edward seemed to have thought of everything. The other wall of the building was made of gold-tinted hexagonal glass panels, each panel tessellated with the next, forming a huge mosaic, an art form in itself. Shuttering controlled the light input over the whole of the glass wall. Even the movable, clear glass section at the apex was motor-controlled. Under the roof side were situated 18 beds, from one end of the building to the other, each with independent alcoves, which were each able to be removed for straight-through cleaning, and which were able to be placed in just about any configuration chosen, including the present novel hexagonal B-cell arrangement, complementing the vast golden wall of glass opposite. Mark was utterly bowled over by it all. He'd never seen anything remotely as ambitious as this place proved to be. "Edward, old fellow, this building's a masterpiece, a monument to your dedication. Did you design it?" "My other hobby," he replied. They quickly made their way back to the house, and Mark and Jane went in to collect their things. After hastily bundling a few last-minute items into the hire car, they went to the steps to bid their friends farewell. Edward gave Mark the address and location of the hospital in question, and wished him well in resolving the problem, as yet undisclosed to him. Mark gave Helen a kiss, and Edward survived an enormous hug from Jane. Once in the car, they swung around to face the driveway. Good luck, shouted Edward. See you both soon. They turned, waved, and set off up the drive, Mark still clutching the precious piece of paper with the address which he dearly hoped would soon lead to an end of the nightmare which haunted them both. On their way back to New York City, they visited the Edison Memorial Tower. Edward had told them that it was worth a look since they were passing nearby. They didn't stay long and were soon heading in the direction of Newark, but turned off onto Interstate Highway 278 and across to Long Island. The hospital was at Garden City, but they booked in at a small hotel just south of Lawrence, a considerable distance south, to organize their gunshot statistics. They wanted their base well away from the hospital in case of unforeseen problems. What we need, said Mark thoughtfully, is a sort of clipboard arrangement with a great wad of paper under a few genuine-looking lists and charts, that sort of thing. We can easily make it appear to be normal. We've collected enough data in our time, after all. If anyone can produce a convincing bit of stats, it's us. Jane anxiously pointed out that if they were discovered to be bogus, Edward would be in trouble as well as themselves. One thing we are okay for is the mandatory white coat, slightly grubby and complete with ink marks above the top pocket, and various white marks on the tails, she laughed, remembering these as the hallmarks of doctors and lab technicians. Very authentic. We did bring them, didn't we? Jane nodded. They had brought with them a great deal of their doctor and nurse-associated regalia, and of course the proof that Mark was indeed a doctor, complete with trailing stethoscope, from the side pocket. The rest of the afternoon's preparation went as well as could be expected under the makeshift conditions. Jane had completed a dozen A4 sheets neatly ruled in black ink, with all the different areas and precincts of the city tabulated against the type of firearm used and an outline of a male and female to which she could mark in the positions of ballistic entry and exit and resulting damage. It certainly impressed Mark, but then Jane had always been good at that sort of thing, presentation for examination answers and such like. With Edward's recommendation, we couldn't be looked at too closely, muttered Mark into his mug of coffee. It all seemed pretty good to me. Besides, with our English accents, they love you, I hope, he quickly added. Mark, began Jane, we must talk to her on her own course, and that might not be too easy. We'll take the note-mate recorder with us, then we won't have to remember what she says, assuming she isn't unconscious. But then the person Edward spoke to would have told him, wouldn't they? By late evening, they had done everything they could think of, including trying to predict any awkward questions they may be asked, even some innocent remark which may catch them off guard. A Plan B situation was decided upon to enable either one of them to slip out of any questioning. All was ready.